Anna, just real quick, oh, perfect, you recorded. Okay, awesome. Okay, I'm going to get my the slides all set up. Thank you guys so much for your patience. Apologize about the link. Just mix up with the link, but hopefully it looks like we have most folks, I think. So I'll watch my email just in case anyone for some reason isn't on and they're trying to get on and they're not able to, and I'll resend it. We are recording this as well. Everyone who is a member is able to speak. So if you're not a member and you're just a member of the public, you will be muted and everything just because this is a public meeting, and that's typically how we do it when it's a live stream. So let me just 1 second get my slides up to share. Trying to do two things at once here. Not doing a very good job. Okay, let's see. Hope you're feeling better, Noah. I'm still not great myself, but I'm plugging away.
Yeah, so Sunday night I woke up with stomach pain and I just had the like awful 36 hours. But last night I started to feel good around like 6 o'clock.
Yeah, mine's more like throat and everything. So, but
All the
okay.
going around right now.
I know. Okay, everyone. Well, are you guys seeing the slides? Noah, give me a okay, perfect. All right. We will get started. Thank you guys again for your patience. And we appreciate everyone joining today. As you guys always know, we start out, all people are empowered to live, love, work, learn, play, and pursue their dreams. Our mantra here at DDRS is we support individuals and their families in Indiana. We got, I'm going to just do the agenda and then I'll have Noah's going to do roll call for us. We've got introductions, as in, like I said, from Noah. We will share the video at the end. I'll find a good video. Maybe we can end this year on a high note and find a video to share. We have Sean and Kyle giving us a MedWorks update. And then Noah and Sean attended the National Art Conference last month, guys, or beginning of this month. I can't remember, sometime recently.
It was beginning of November.
Beginning of November. Okay. In Columbus, Indiana, they were bummed that it wasn't like Hawaii or California, but they said they had fun. And then we'll have BRS Teresa here to give us an update. And then Kelly will share. We talked about this last month. You guys might remember really looking at our committee and the council and really looking at your guys' thoughts as members of what you want to talk about, what you want to discuss, how you want the meetings, to move forward in the next couple of years. We thought it would be good first, just because we are going to have some new members that are going to be joining us in January. We thought it'd be a good idea just to do a level set of DDRS supports and services over the last, not even just couple years, but really taking us back even, to earlier in 2000, not just even in the last 5 years. So Kelly's got some really good slides put together and a discussion around just kind of a level set of where we were and then where we've gone in the last couple years, and then as that heads into the future of waiver reset and waiver redesign. And then, as always, we'll have a parking lot, some items in discussion. So if you have anything that doesn't relate to this, if you want to hold on to it, even just put it in the chat maybe so we don't lose sight of that. We can make sure we address that at the end. And I will turn it over to you, Noah, if you want to do roll call. Hopefully it's accurate. If not, that's my fault.
No worries. Sean Fulton.
I am here.
Katie Stafford Cunningham.
Present.
Karen Brummett.
Good morning, everybody.
Kate Barrow.
I'm here.
Kim Dotson.
Tom Krishan here on behalf of Kim Dotson.
Ann Titus. Kelly Hartman.
I'm here.
Noah Upchurch present. Melissa Keys.
I'm here.
Carrie Lee.
Here.
Derek Nord.
I'm present, thanks.
Lisa Paddock.
And on behalf of Lisa Paddock, this is Bridget Tavares.
Thank you. Loretta Springer.
Here.
Kim Hahn.
Here. Good morning.
Kelly Mitchell.
Good morning, everyone.
Kathy Robinson.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Jessica Harlan York.
Hey, everyone.
Kyle Ingram.
Good morning.
Matt Rodway, Holly Wimsatt,
Good morning. Good to see your all's faces.
Teresa Colazar,
Morning.
Christina Commons, Billy Martin Johnson. All right, and that concludes roll call.
Great. Now, so it was up to date.
Pleasure.
We got something right now. All right. Thanks, Noah. Appreciate it. Okay, we are going to jump off. I'm going to turn it over to Sean and Kyle again to give us the MedWork subcommittee and the recommendations and speak a little bit to that. I'll run the slides for you guys. Hopefully not all won't mess anything.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks.
You can go to the next slide, Jessica. All right, so I just wanted to jump in just quickly to share a little bit about the work that was done during the subcommittee meetings to explore the history and the current design of the MedWorks program in Indiana. So just quickly, it was established in state law in 2001. There was one substantive amendment in 2003 to the state law to include income in the personal needs allowance calculation and to also require that premium adjustments are made if there's a change for the individual in their family size or income. But other than that, that was the only really substantive changes that were made to the MedWorks program in state law from the time that it was first enacted. The administrative rules really have not substantively changed since 2005. And again, premium amounts are unchanged since it was initiated, since the program was actually implemented. That was 2002. What that means then, and we discussed this in the subcommittee meeting, that the premiums that are charged now are in effect lower than what they were in 2002 as a portion of someone's income. So for example, the $48 premium that was charged in 2002, if you were using $2,024, that premium would be $83.91. Next slide, Jessica.
I need like 3 monitors when I do this. Sorry.
No, you're
Two's
fine.
not cutting it.
So we took a look to see, this was asked by the subcommittee members to look and see how we compared to other states, both in terms of the asset limits, the income limits that we set as a state for the program and the asset limits that we set for the program. So in looking at the monthly income limits across the country, most states have their version of the MedWorks program. There's a handful that don't. But as we looked across the country, we ranked as the 4th highest monthly income limit, tied with Illinois. There were only 3 other states, Oregon, Idaho, and Colorado, who had higher income limits to be eligible for their MedWorks program. The next slide. However, when we looked at the asset limits that are set forth in state law, Indiana has the lowest individual asset limit, tied with a number of other states, California, Delaware, North Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. Our asset limit is tied to the federal Social Security SSI limits. So 2,000 for an individual and 3,000 for a couple. Those are the lowest asset limits that we saw in the country. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand this over to Sean because as the chair, he really kind of guided us through a lot of these discussions and prioritization of where we went. I'm going to just hand this over to Sean to talk through some of the highlights around the recommendations from that subcommittee. Sean.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. So recommendation A is to increase asset limits to national average to 10,000 for an individual and 13,000 for a couple. I would have liked to have had it higher, but we got to go with what we can.
No, Jessica,
have
we lost the slides.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I was like, what? That messed me up. Um, so C is expand program age range and upper or up. The age limit should be tied to federal full retirement age. D and F explore changes to able accounts policies to support access to MedWorks. Next slide. And recommendation E is improve understanding and awareness of MedWorks by state staff and working Hoosiers with disabilities. Recommendation G is expand access to benefit counseling. Find new ways to fund and provide benefits counseling. Increase the number of trained benefits counselors and improve access to benefits counseling in underserved communities. Let me just say, in the whole time that we were in the MedWorks subcommittee, we had lots and lots of discussions on where things should go. So this is what we ended up with.
Thank you, Sean. And I'm going to kick it back over to Sean here in a moment to talk about kind of why the subcommittee felt some of these recommendations were so important and what we think this does to help move the needle on employment. But the full recommendations report is now public, and it goes into certainly more detail about those recommendations that Sean talked through and a couple of others. But we wanted to just flag or highlight for this advisory group the recommendations made by the subcommittee that need a legislative change versus the ones that really can be driven by state agency, not just DDRS, but state agency work that doesn't require or doesn't have legislative change as a prerequisite. So the legislative changes that were the recommendations from the subcommittee that need a legislative change because there is state law that is prohibiting or making the recommendation challenging to implement are the following things: increasing the asset limits, eliminating income limits, and expanding the upper age range for eligibility. All three of those are set forth in the MedWorks statute. Additionally, the subcommittee really felt like, frankly, that we were only able to really scratch the surface on some of these discussions and the time that we had allotted from the legislature. And so the recommendation was made by the subcommittee for the legislature to establish a study committee that could develop additional recommendations either this year or the next year. The subcommittee recommends that study committee really center and include the input and the participation of individuals with disabilities in that work. So those are the kind of big recommendations that need legislative changes to be able to implement. On the state agency kind of programmatic side, some of the recommendations were to increase awareness of the MedWorks program, again, coordinating peer-to-peer financial literacy supports and increasing access to benefits counseling. Those are things that I think are particularly relevant to our discussions and to our work, and things that we either have initiatives or work already planned or started on those things, or these are places where we can begin to get to work based on those subcommittee recommendations. I'll turn this over again to Sean, I think, just to kind of give your conclusions and thoughts, Sean, as the subcommittee chair on this. What do you want the advisory council to know about our work and the recommendations?
So, okay, thank you, Kyle. So can we go back to the last slide? So in part of my reflection is that since the ones that are on the slide with the legislative changes, so those, if all of us do our due diligence and contact our legislators and tell them and talk to them about these issues right here that need to be changed, I'm sure that they will get changed by you guys helping out with talking to your legislators. And by changing one thing at like all of this would be a segue of changing other stuff for people with disabilities to be able to achieve their dreams that they want to have and not be held down to I guess I want to say poverty level, so they can't achieve their dreams. And so with all of us doing our due diligence, we should be able to achieve what we want to have people with disabilities be able to do, just like people without disabilities. And it was a pleasure for me to do another subcommittee, which the two subcommittees that I have been on have been like probably the second and third privilege thing that I've got to do. I don't know if I want to use privilege, but I hope this is the start of something. By changing one thing, we can change other things for the better. Thanks.
Sean, I can speak for a lot of us. I think we appreciate your contribution for sure. So you know that, but I can always say it. Okay, Sean, you want me to go ahead and, oh, I just saw Carrie's hand.
Yeah,
Is
I was
that
just
Carrie?
gonna
You go
say-
ahead. Do you want to? Sorry, Sean, did you see that? I don't know if you can. It's hard to see sometimes when you're trying to present, but. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
I
Carrie.
just wanted to ask, where could we find the report if we wanted to see like more of the details on the recommendations?
That would be you, Kyle.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to think. So they were submitted and presented to the 1102 task force when it met, was it last month? Yeah, in October. Well, I don't know if that has been posted anywhere based on the task force work, or if we can get that into the hands of you all separately. I'll have to kind of dig into that, Jessica, and if we need to, we can send that out to this group just separately.
Yeah, I'll put that, Carrie, as a
I
note.
think it's included in the minutes that are under review from the task
Yeah.
force. So
I'll make a note, Carrie, and then like to check back because I'll forget if I not, and then I can just make sure, send it out to the group once those are posted. And if I forget, just email me. Thanks.
Can I
Sean, you want me
ask-
to move? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, I don't know how to put my hand up like y'all do. I gotta figure that out yet. So Sean, do you know who is going to lead the who's going to lead that legislative action? Because I know you were working with Heather and NAPC and another ARC. Just so we know kind of as we're kind of moving forward, who's going to kind of carry that banner so that we all kind of follow behind.
Well, Kyle, am I allowed to say that I think it's gonna be like the two legislators that were on
Okay,
the med
Yeah.
perfect.
subcommittee, right? And
Well, I guess
that
we'll stay tuned.
was that Yoder?
Yeah, Senator Yoder and Representative Claire are on the task force. I will say, we don't know, again, we're not lobbying for legislative changes. We do certainly support state legislators when they have questions about things. I think we have seen a number of prior efforts around MedWorks, just making changes, not necessarily exactly the changes that the subcommittee presented, but I think we have perhaps good guesses about who either would be interested in engaging with these recommendations because they've already introduced legislation in prior years, or we might find out as we get closer to January who's going to carry, if anyone is going to carry these recommendations.
Okay.
but we don't
Aaron, this
we don't
is-
know today date. who
Yeah.
that might be.
Karen, this is Tom Krishon from the Arc of Indiana. I'll note that we're going to be involved in trying to, at least a portion of the recommendations, try to work with some legislators on some language.
Okay.
Yeah, and I already told Representative Yoder and Claire that I would come over there if they need me to, because you guys know I will.
Yeah. I think there's a whole bunch of stories that especially support raising the asset limit. I know of like 3 or 4 myself of people that almost lost their jobs because the asset level didn't allow them to get their car fixed to stay employed. So I love this. I think that was a great list, guys. Good job.
Thanks.
Related to that, can I ask the group a question just from everyone assembled here?
Hey, Tom, I have a question. Do you mind not, I know you introduced yourself. I don't know if some folks hopefully know, but would you be able to say your new role? I don't
Yeah.
remember if we did this. I know you're
No,
filling
that's
in for
fine, yeah.
him, but it might be helpful because I know
Absolutely.
it's a great asset to I know IDR lost you, but a great asset to ARC. So would you mind just sharing just in case folks who maybe didn't see the announcement?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So Tom Krishon, I'm the new chief legal officer for the Arc of Indiana. So I'll work with Kim on, amongst other things, some of the legislative actions and public policy related things at State House. Formerly from IDR, spent 14 years there. Melissa is happy for my change. Thanks, Jessica. So just really quick, I did have a question, and I would love if anybody had information about this, but we're talking about the asset limits and the resource limits. In the statute, there's an allowance for $20,000 for independence and self-sufficiency accounts to be not included in countable resources. Is that ever utilized or approved?
That's a good question, Tom. That was not a large part of the discussion. I don't think that particular allowance is utilized very often.
Okay. It says
we
it's
did-
subject to the approval of the office. So I'm kind of I was just
Yeah.
kind of curious in practice whether that is being utilized or ever has been utilized or
Yeah.
even the process of how to utilize it. So that was
yeah, the number of folks that are actually on the MedWorks program to begin with is relatively small. We're only talking less than 3,500 people, you know, on average every year. So the number of folks that would then be using one of those individual self-sufficiency accounts, I'm not sure. We did discuss in pretty great detail how ABLE accounts can support someone who's in MedWorks. Certainly, ABLE accounts are not the right solution for every person, and so that's part of why the subcommittee ultimately recommended a change to the asset limits themselves rather than developing additional mechanisms to kind of go around that or shelter resources from that limit, because you know, ABLE accounts are great, and I think we're going to see some movement in terms of who can access those, an expansion of that. But as the subcommittee worked, they said, you know, it's not a one size fits all for everybody, and so we're just going to tackle the problem rather than kind of creating novel solutions for it. So, hope that answers your question, Tom.
no, I think it does. I think it's just not what's currently in the statute isn't really being utilized. It doesn't sound like. So okay, that's what I was curious about it. Thank you.
Go ahead. You ready? Oh, wait, is there any more questions? Oh, there is more. Maybe. Oh, just giving you praise, Sean. Which you
All right,
have, we
thanks.
can't ignore that. So, do you want to share any other reflections or anything, Sean? I don't want to.
Nope, I don't want to ruin anything that I just said because I thought that was pretty good.
End on that note. No. Mic drop, I guess. We need a mic drop little emoji, but okay. Anything else, Kyle, that you guys want to share? Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Thank you guys. It's super helpful. Okay, moving along. Sean, still to you and Noah. Just any takeaways you guys want to share from the National Art Conference a couple weeks ago?
Noah, I'll let you start since I've been talking.
Okay, yeah. So, seven self advocates had the chance to go to the ARC National Conference, which was a really cool thing for us because usually we're not able to have as many self advocates attend because it's usually somewhere far away. But we all had a really good experience there in Columbus, Ohio. Some of the big takeaways for me is hearing about what other states do with their waiver dollars. I heard from a colleague that they were able to use their waiver dollars for personal training from their ISP. So I thought that was really interesting. Um, some of the other big standouts for me were I attended a session about seclusion and restraint and hearing from this perspective of a father who his child, um, had that happen and the work that they did in their community to try to change things. So that was a really interesting session for me. And then another one would be a self advocate group in Ohio who, in the pandemic, started a podcast, and the way that they engaged their self advocate group and actually brought in local legislators and had them appear on the podcast. So that was a really interesting, um, another standout session for me.
Well, and Noah, in that same thing that Noah and I were in that same one, and I thought it was cool how they brought in the elements like fire, water, and wind and all that into that conversation to describe how they started with the podcast and all and everything that they do and over there. So that was actually pretty cool.
And the way that the podcast transitioned from being something that there was
A staff member
a
that did
staff
it.
member did it, and then to a self advocate who is currently running. I thought that was really cool to hear the perspective of how they orchestrated that change and got everything ready, and the kind of things that they needed to do to make that change happen. So that was really interesting.
And then Noah and I went to this solar power um, discussion, and I thought it was going to be for people with disabilities, but it ended up being for provider agencies to use for their they buy the power or something like that. And do you remember, Noah, how that went?
So yeah, it was solar panels for group homes and for provider agencies, and I thought that was really interesting about how that can be used to um, transform the energy output of those provider agencies and those group homes to be more green. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to hear about, and the way that program can be used. A couple different arcs across the country using the Arc of the US is partnering with this that organization. So that was really interesting to hear about as well.
And then the National Council of Self Advocates meeting, we heard from Executive Director CDO Yvette Pigas. I think that is how you say her last name. I'm not good at weird names like that, but they were talking about HCBS and the strategies to help with how you communicate with your legislators. So that was pretty cool. How some of the self advocates on that panel did stuff in their state.
Well, it was interesting to hear about how other states implemented HCBS and how some other places don't have it. Like we met with an individual from the UK who a lot of the stuff that we have here is something that they don't have over there. So that was really interesting to hear that perspective.
And then one last thing, Noah and I and Lexi's mom got to meet these people from the UK. So they came over here to see how our all of our stuff works here in the US. And so we ended up doing a video for them. Each of us did a video. Me, I talked all about EGTI, Erskine Green, And Noah, what did you talk about?
I talked about employment as well, actually.
Yeah, so they were like happy to talk to all four of us about stuff in Indiana, how we do things different than Ohio. And because Ohio, if you guys don't know that, each county does their benefits and all that stuff, which I think is kind of weird. I'm glad we don't do that. But yeah, then they were saying in the UK that it's really hard over there for people with disabilities in some places because there's not widely spread benefits. Isn't that how she said that, Noah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we learned a lot from the people from the UK, which was really cool to listen to their perspective about stuff.
Well, it sounded like their HCBS was extremely limited.
Yes, that is true. And then the second half of the National Council of Self Advocates, I was the MC for that, and we do this thing at the second part of the council thing, and where we pick out names and give away prizes. So I jinxed ourselves and gave out most of the prizes to Indiana, which was kind of weird because I wasn't even looking in the bag. But that was funny. And then the host event was pretty funny because they had this guy that had a disability that was a comedian. And in past national council or the art conventions, there's not been anybody that has cussed in the host event. But this guy, he was really funny and wasn't shy of cussing. So but it was totally different. Then they had a band and some more derivatives. So it was really cool.
Yeah, it was a really good event with a really good list of sessions. The whole conference, I feel like people got a lot of. I talked to the self advocates that we brought, and all of them had a big takeaways coming from the event. So I was really happy to hear that.
Yeah, and I'm just glad that it wasn't freezing.
True, it was actually pretty warm.
Yeah, I think that's all we got. Unless you have something else, Noah.
I think that's all I have as well.
That was awesome. Thank you guys. I appreciate that.
And they don't know where the next one's going to be.
Dang it. Hopefully it's not Columbus, Ohio. No, nothing against Columbus. It's okay. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I don't think we have any questions right now or any comments, but thanks for that information. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to move right along to Teresa Colazar to give us a Bureau of Rehabilitation Services update. Teresa, I'll try to do the slides as best I can.
Thank you. All right, we can go ahead and move forward to the good stuff. Okay. So again, this format should look pretty familiar, sound pretty familiar. This is maybe the last update since we were able to successfully end the order of selection wait lists last month. So just to kind of put a final pin on that, we'll go through all of the standing items here. And then I've got a few additional updates and some performance highlights from the last year as I wind down. So as of about 2 weeks ago, when we last looked at last pulled our staffing reports, still have 205 ER counselor positions. 8 of those were vacant, which is 4% of our counselor positions. And then 21 are what we consider new staff or staff in trainee status, which means they've been hired sometime within the last roughly 9 or so months. And that represents 10%. So we combine those for an overall turnover rate. So 14%, which means retention of about 86%. We continue to be pretty pleased with kind of holding to that pretty steadily. Next slide. On October 7th, we did our final release, our final poll of eligible individuals off of that wait list. which took the wait list down to 0. And here we are, November 20th. It remains at 0. So we're proceeding without a wait list at this point in time. Of course, we'll continue to monitor capacity, fiscal resources, in light of our growing population to, kind of just evaluate our ability to continue to sustain services without a wait list. Next slide. There were 2,214 new applicants this state fiscal year, which started in July through early part of November. So to date, 2,214, that continues to rise. So that is a 13% increase from that time frame last year and a 24% increase from that same time frame 2 years ago. And you can see the numbers there. So 2,214 to date this year versus 1,956 last year, the same time period, and 1,784 the prior. Next slide. Again, that doesn't cover a full year yet. That's just to date. The number on the wait list I mentioned is 0. Let's scoot past that slide. The number of individuals currently receiving services, so my disclaimer, you probably get tired of hearing that, is this is simply a snapshot in time. It does not represent the total number of people we serve in a year. It does not include people getting pre-employment transition services who have not come into the VR program. It is simply just that day that the data was pulled, how many active open cases that have made it to service plan were posted. So 10,888. Again, that doesn't include people in application or eligibility status. That's just those in service plan as of that day. That is a 3% increase from the August DDRS update in this council and an 8% increase from the April, the time before. So again, continuing to see that growth. This number, of course, fluctuates on the daily. When we look at the total number of people that we served in a given year, the last full state fiscal year, that was 14,119 individuals. Again, that does not include those potentially eligible pre-ETS individuals because they're not VR. They're not VR applicants or eligible individuals. They've not applied for services. So that's around 7,500 pre-ETS potentially eligible students in addition to the 14,119 with VR cases. And I think we shared this last time. That's an 11.5% increase from state fiscal year 23 and a 16% increase from state fiscal year 22. Next slide. I mentioned very briefly when we met in August that we would be releasing a request for funding, or RFF, as you see that on the screen here. That did get released. In fact, it's been out long enough now that proposals from our registered providers who are interested in applying are due next week. So we will spend our Turkey Day and upcoming seasonal holidays reviewing hopefully many requests for funding proposals. We're hoping for a good response rate. We did kind of administratively assess our capacity. We think we can handle, if you will, we can monitor around 15 or so. So we're hoping that there are 15, good, complete proposals that we're able to fund. So more to come on that. We hope to announce, make awards in January. And just to recap for those that maybe weren't here last time or just did other things, as we all do since then, this is really designed for, again, registered VR employment service providers to support strategically growing their employment units. So what that really means is potentially expanding their employment services staff unit that works specifically with VR participants and making sure that there is robust training to support those new staff. So the hope is that they could serve more timely, serve more people in their current coverage area, or if we have a need in other coverage areas, potentially expand to those areas with the ultimate goal of getting better and more employment outcomes, seeing more employment outcomes and better employment outcomes for folks we're serving. Some of you might be familiar with an annual report that we publish along with the Vocational Rehabilitation Commission on Rehabilitation Services, or VR Commission, as we tend to call it for short. We have a draft of that. It will take a similar format that we've used in the prior few years, where really the feature is on some individuals with lived experience with disabilities who have accessed VR services and have shared a little bit about their journey, a little bit about their story of success, their experience. So that will again be the highlight of the annual report. And then just some general program highlights as well. That is due at the end of December. We are aiming to get it done before the holidays, and then it will be posted on our website, definitely by January, if not sooner. Some of you also might be aware, we continue to work on our comprehensive statewide needs assessment. This is something we're federally required to do every 3 years, but it's also a useful exercise as we identify pain points, identify what's working well, and really use that to help guide priorities as we go forward. We are aiming to see that completed in early 2025. And then I mentioned a quick update on the SE Plus, or Support Employment Plus project, the last time we met. We continue along. We just recently kicked off year 3 of the grant of the funding, but year 2 of the implementation piece. So we finished our first full year of implementation September 30th and started the next year, started fresh October with our year 2. So again, entering year 3 of the funding, but year 2 of the actual implementation of the model. We have expanded to another site. So we started with 4 pilot sites that had 7 different sheltered workshop or 14C facilities among them. And we have added a site. So now we have 5 pilot sites that have 10 14C physical locations among them. And the SE Plus project is one more opportunity for us to continue our alignment efforts across VR and BDS. We continue in fact, our SE Plus project manager, Will Coltrion, and Kyle continue to have a standing meeting with the goal of kind of making sure we know what one another are doing, aligning projects, not moving down too many different paths. Will is pretty involved with some of the pilots and the special projects and grant funding with some of the same providers that have SE Plus, but also many other providers outside of that. And we continue to partner. I'll just give you a couple examples. We continue to partner pretty closely on some mapping and alignment initiatives with support from the Support Employment Leadership Network at a national level, as we try to stay in the same path forward with that common goal of just doing an ultimately better job, more streamlined job of promoting and supporting people down employment pathways. I don't know, Kyle, if you want to add anything. All right, next slide.
So I don't think there's any question. Kyle, are you able to follow the chat? Is that okay? Can
I
you
don't see any questions.
Okay, good. Sorry, I'm trying to look it
I can
up.
keep
So
an eye on it, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, and then I just have a few additional slides just to highlight some performance measures for our last completed performance year. So what is on the slide here are Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, common federal performance measures. So VR across the nation is considered a core workforce partner under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, along with most of our DWD, Department of Workforce Development programs. So we are held to those. We have those same federal performance metrics. We negotiate our benchmarks with the Rehabilitation Services Administration every time we submit a state plan, and then they measure our performance against those benchmarks. So I've gone back a few years to show some positive movements from where we were in performance year 20, which is state fiscal year 21. The feds like to keep us on our toes. So the performance year is named a little bit differently than a state fiscal year, or even more differently than a federal fiscal year. So I've put both of those timeframes on there if it's easier to follow the state fiscal year. So over time, over the last 4 years or so, if you look over to the far right, we've had growth pretty much all across the board. The exception being measurable skill gains, where we're pretty flat. It's less than a 1% difference We kind of go up and down just ever so slightly on the measurable skill gains. I will say, and you'll see this in the coming slides, on measurable skill gains, we have one of the highest performances of VR agencies in the country here. So we're not overly concerned with a couple percentage point differences because we are already in the top quadrant, or 25% of all VR agencies nationally in terms of measurable skill gains. Not to toot our own horn, but I'm going to toot our own horn a little bit. I'm going to be very transparent with you on areas that we have to improve in, as well as areas that we are seeing some great success in. So one area we are continuing to keep our eye on here is the median quarterly earnings after exits. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the coming slide, where with measurable skill gains, we are performing very, very well nationally. It's kind of the opposite story with median quarterly earnings. We are near the we are in the bottom quadrant, or near the bottom nationally in terms of the level of median quarterly earnings. And I'll give you a little bit of perspective on that as we go into the next slide. But quickly, before we do that, I just want to give you a very high level description of these 5 metrics. So employment second quarter after exit. So you might remember, if you were here pre-WIOA, we were measured by the feds all completely on what was the picture when the day the person left the program, right? What was their wage that day? What was their job that day? How many hours? What was their primary source of support? All those things. That is no longer the case. We are now measured on what happens after someone leaves the program, which is, it's tricky, right? It's hard. It's a different perspective. So there's been this shift to preparing people for the beyond, right? So not closing cases just to, to get that, we got that closure, they're working today, but preparing people so that they're still working. The hope is that they're then advancing and still working after they leave services, that we've set them up for better sustainability, right? So employment second quarter after exit of anyone that was working, what percent of individuals are continuing to work 2 quarters after they leave the VR program? And that's more than just 6 months on the job, because people are staying with us for at minimum 3 months before they're exiting the system, and more likely multiple months or even up to a couple years after placement to get the supports they need before we're closing their case. So while this is second quarter after exit, this may mean that they've held that job for 1 year, 2 years, 2.5 years, and so on. So we continue to perform pretty well in this regard. We are in the top half, probably top third in terms of our employment retention second quarter. And then the next one, same thing, but fourth quarter after exit. We talked about median quarterly earnings. I'll cover that a little bit more on the next slide. And then quickly, credential attainment rate. This one's measured a little bit differently. This is individuals who achieved a post-secondary credential attainment either during their VR case or up to, I believe it's either 2 quarters or 4 quarters, up to a time period after they exit the VR program. So this does capture if someone does obtain that credential while they're a VR participant, but also we track this to see if those credentials are earned for a period of time, 2 to 4 months after they exit from the VR program. Our performance here has changed dramatically from 2021 state fiscal year. I will tell you some of that is better data collection, and some of that is better effort to help people who start post-secondary training to complete post-secondary training. That includes some of the clarifications and additional guidance and structure that we put around determining post-secondary funding, as well as additional wraparound supports that folks need, as well as our improved relationships with post-secondary entities. So we were at 13.5%, not very good in 2021, and over 50% in state fiscal year 24. That rivals a lot of public post-secondary institutions for all students. And again, we are obviously talking here a population of students who might have additional barriers because of a disability or other factors. And then measurable skill gains is similar in that if someone achieves a skill gain while their case is open or up to 2 to 4 months, I can't remember now which one it is, 2 to 4 quarters after exit. And that could include a credential. So it's inclusive of those credentials, but it also could include more more action. So maybe they've earned enough credits, for instance, to now be considered a sophomore enrolled in training instead of a freshman, for example. Okay. Right, next slide. You probably had enough of that. Okay, so I told you I was going to be very transparent in our areas of improvement. None of this probably is the first time you're hearing this either. If you look at our state plan, if you hear us give updates, I think you'll see we very much recognize those areas of improvement, and we have outlined priorities and focus areas going forward designed to really try to see some movement, some positive movement here. Oh, I lost our slide there, Jessica.
Okay, he is not here, so yeah. No Westwood, huh?
And we've got someone off mute there. Okay, let's see if I can mute them. Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, so areas of improvement. We talked about median quarterly earnings. I just want to give a little perspective here too. This is a median. It's not an average, so it's that middle, the middle, right? The middle point of whatever those quarterly earnings reports show. In Indiana, we are including folks earning at sub-minimum wage. Okay, so that's already moving our median down a bit. And I think one of the reasons we're not seeing we're seeing very little movement on median earnings performance. So we have a lot of work to do, but there are some factors that are maybe explaining a little bit or in portion as to why we aren't seeing as much of that movement as we would like to and need to see. And one of those is that, again, these median earnings it's the middle. So since our increased initiatives to get folks in those 14C, those sub-minimum wage entities into services to pursue competitive integrated employment, we've seen that population grow, okay? So we have more wage records represented in our count of folks receiving sub-minimum wages. Okay, so that's kind of maybe bumping us a little bit. The other piece here is that there's no accounting for cost of living. So our median earnings are being stacked against New York, right? East Coast, California, so on and so forth, as well as Midwest states. So we're probably never going to hit the top 25% here, although we can strive toward that. But again, there's no accounting for any kind of cost of living variations among states. The other piece here, and I'll call your attention to the sentence in red at the bottom. In Indiana, we serve a very high percentage of individuals with more significant disabilities. In part, that's been due to where we've been at with the order of selection, but in part, that is due to just the structure of VR and waiver services in Indiana. In Indiana, VR plays a very strong role in employment services for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so 31% of the employment outcomes in Indiana VR were individuals in supported employment services, whereas the national average is only 12%. Okay, so we're seeing a very high portion of folks with more significant disabilities, higher support needs. So putting all that out there for some perspective, all that said, we have work to do here. We absolutely want to see those median wages increase, and hopefully you'll see some of the goals and focus areas that we have put in place will help us to do that.
Teresa?
Yes.
So that last line,
Mm-hmm.
So versus what? So Indiana is 31% versus 12%. So what, it seems like that's a negative, right? That you're saying that's a negative?
No. That's a highlight.
That's
so
a highlight,
I think it's a
right.
highlight that we are
Okay.
serving people.
Okay, I thought you were saying that was
individuals.
negative. I'm like, I don't understand why that's a negative. I think that's
No, let me take us back. So VR serves a broad population. Only a portion of the population we serve are folks who need supported employment services. Other folks either maybe already have employment and we're helping them to sustain that, or we're helping them to advance, or they do need employment, but they don't need those extra supports. It's non-supported employment, or job placement. So there's eligibility for VR, and then once you're eligible, only a sub part of that group is going to be eligible for supported employment services based on being a person with the most significant disability who needs those additional, individualized, hands-on supports to help them be successful in learning their job and sustaining their job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I apologize if I was the only one that lost the context of that, but I'm like, I feel like
No.
that's a really positive thing to say about Indiana. And so I
It
would
is.
like
Yes,
a
it is,
highlight
yes.
seem like that's a good thing. Okay.
It's a good thing, yes.
I
yes.
apologize for misunderstanding.
No, that's okay. And maybe I should have put it on the good slide.
Just
yes.
to chime in a little too, this is Derek.
Yep.
I think this is really helpful kind of breakdown. And I think the prior slide, I was questioning exactly this. So to see it framed out makes absolute sense. I think that bottom point, I agree. I think that is a highlight. I think it's something that a lot of VR agencies,
Moving on the other one.
that a lot of VR agencies don't necessarily across the country. They don't. I do think VR's purpose, or one of its major purposes, is supporting and adding additional support, providing additional support to people with the most significant disabilities. So I just commend you all for that commitment. It's amazing and really important. I would also add into this though something that maybe comes into play, and I'm not sure exactly how, but I feel like Sean's discussion that started us in this meeting around the Medicaid, some of the income and eligibility pieces. I wonder how much that plays in. I know we can't really understand exactly how that plays in right now, but it does seem it's all connected in some way. And I think there's probably to some degree some connection to this as well.
Absolutely. Yes, it's here
Yeah,
because
and-
it's a relevant perspective for those median earnings, but I agree. I agree it's a highlight. Yeah. Was there someone
Teresa,
else?
yeah,
Yeah.
this is Kelly. And Derek, thank you for that comment, and Karen. And yes, indeed, it is a highlight. And I just really wanted to layer on in admiration of Indiana VR and really the system as a whole. To the point that you made, there are many states where vocational rehabilitation doesn't necessarily work as well with their division or department of developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities, or they do not have a significant focus and or support of individuals with the most severe disabilities and significant needs, and really that push on support employment. So I think, Teresa, I just also wanted to commend you and your team. You referenced in an earlier slide the alignment across the division and across the bureaus, that this really is a holistic focus. And I think that outcome, that additional highlight, is reflective of that.
Kelly.
Move it to the positive page, Teresa.
All right. Well, I just really quickly, employment rate, and this is different than the employment retention on the last slide. Okay. So employment retention is, are people keeping their job? At what rates are people sustaining employment? Employment rate is everyone who comes in and receives services under a plan, kind of what's the ratio of people leaving with employment to those without. That's oversimplified, but that's where I'll leave it for today. We are a little bit below the national average in this. Again, some of those same perspectives could be at play here, but that doesn't take away the fact that we recognize we've got some serious work to do here. And then the percent of cases enrolled in training, again, while our performance, or the folks we're serving, their performance in terms of completing training for those who start is very high. The total percent of VR participants enrolled in the first place is low compared to the national average. So again, you'll see in our focus areas, there's a very clear, pointed, intentional focus on increasing that enrollment in post-secondary training. All right, the good stuff, Karen, let's get to it. Next slide. Okay, so there's lots of highlights. I think you talked about a couple of them. These are areas of success. So employment retention, I mentioned already that we are performing well nationally. We're a little bit above the national average for both of those. Credential attainment rate, we're way above the national average, top 25% there. Measurable skill gains, same thing. We're very high. I think we might have bumped to like 27% this last year, but performing very, very well nationally in both of those. And then one we haven't talked about so far is our growth. And this is a little tricky. You think 0%, well, there's no growth there. So from 2017 to 2024 state fiscal years, there's been this sort of pendulum swing. Following WIOA, we kind of think things have been growing and then they kind of plateaued in terms of the total participants across the nation in VR. Along comes the pandemic, right? And we all experienced, and by all, I mean every single 77 VR state agency in the nation, we experienced this dip, right? And people served, and we've been climbing back out of that dip ever since, okay? So average across the nation, total participants in VR nationally is still down 7% from where it was in 2017. In Indiana, we've come right back where we were, okay? So that's why the 0% is a positive. We've come right back where we were with our growth. You might say bounced out of or bounced back from that dip or that drop in people served. And then when we just look at our growth from the prior year versus going all the way back to the growth from 17, the national average was a 7% increase from 23 to 24, where we had a 12% increase. So we're now growing a bit faster than what is the average nationally. All right, and I think one final slide I have just to tie this all together. So what are we doing? What are we doing about these things? If you've seen our state plan or heard us talk about that, there's two big overarching goals, and that's increasing customer engagement and improving the quantity and quality of outcomes, which will probably forever and always be an overarching goal. At the end of the day, that is what we are here for. How we get there may look different, right, from year to year. So just very quickly, some specific strategies. We want to continue our emphasis with our team in VR on making eligibility determinations more rapidly. Federally, there's a 60-day time frame. We're doing that currently within about 34. We'd like to see that come down even, to an even quicker time frame. Seeing less people exit before they get to plan. We've made some progress here, but more progress to be made. Quality participant interactions, really focusing on those counselor-participant relationships, and then targeting some outreach to students. There's a lot of value in trying to get that population connected to services, of course, before we lose them. It's really hard to find them if we don't get them connected before they leave. And there tends to be a disengagement trend with that population. And I don't know if it's because they have so much going on to finish school, but there's a lot of follow-through challenges with that population. So overall, reducing that dropout or attrition before people get the services that they need, and certainly before, hopefully, an employment outcome. And then quickly on the increased quality and quantity of outcomes, increasing emphasis on enrollment and post-secondary training, including more awareness within our own teams, and then subsequently with the folks that are coming for services, more awareness of those short-term credential attainment opportunities, which often lead to a more direct path, right, into the workforce, often with a higher paying wage than, nothing against these degrees. I was a 4-year psychology major, but sometimes those are not real direct paths into the workforce, and we spend a lot of money and a lot of time getting there. And that's great. If that is someone's goal, we will support that if that makes sense. But we're sometimes not thinking about these short-term pathways that are a direct line into real jobs in your community that have advancement, that have good wages, so on and so forth. So really trying to increase awareness of those opportunities, because I think we're missing out a little bit. Continuing to focus on provider and vendor capacity. That's a very important part of this equation, right? We can move as fast as we can achieve in VR, but there's other partners, there's other vendors that we rely on and are an extension of us. That's also essential for the capacity to be improved there. And then continuing emphasis on work-based learning. We know that that's an effective way to get people to work, and career pathways, not just starting in one spot and being there for 20 years, but helping you think about that future. What's your next step? Is there opportunity to advance in that pathway? That's all I have.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. I'm going to move on, just even if we have questions, if you guys just want to save them, just so we have enough time to focus from Kelly on just looking at our HCBS services and taking a step back and looking at the past and where we're going in the future. Thanks. Okay, Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll advance your slides for you.
All right. Just yell at me if someone puts a hand up, because it's
Kyle, I might have you help me if you don't care.
I don't do a great job of watching.
I don't
for
either.
that
I
when
know.
I'm
I have trouble
presenting.
even when I'm moving the slides.
I'm with
and,
you.
yeah.
I need one more screen.
Maybe between the three or four of
This
us, we
is
can-
much easier for me in person
Yeah.
than it is virtually. But anyway, welcome again, everyone, and happy to be here. I think we talked the last couple of times we've met about some of the coming changes in our home and community-based services. And we've also been reflecting on some of the coming changes with our DDRS Advisory Council, that we will be seating some new members as the new calendar year begins in January of 2025. So really, for those two reasons, wanted to start a process of kind of level setting, providing a bit more education rather than just kind of reporting on metrics as to what we do and from where we came, and to give a bit of context. Today, what I'd like to focus on, and you see on the screen in front of you, is really a review of our home and community-based services. And this is a high-level view, and it's going to focus, again, on home and community-based service. So more of what is afforded and offered through our Bureau of Disability Services. In January, as we onboard new members, and we'll talk about that a bit later, we'll plan to do a broader kind of overview of the entire division and the services and supports that we offer. So, Jessica, if you would, advance me, please. So I'm sure many of you have been along this journey as long as I have, but I really wanted to give a little bit
Kelly,
of
is this the right one? I'm sorry, because I don't know that you didn't. I'm on the right one, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I had already advanced it. Sorry about that. Okay, I just want to make sure.
Sorry. So just a little bit of a background, if you will, regarding Indiana's journey to home and community-based services. It really wasn't that long ago when individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities were predominantly supported in institutional settings. Honestly, prior to the 1950s, late 50s and 60s, the majority of any type of services were provided in institutional settings and often not quality settings. There was a time frame where family members of individuals with those intellectual and developmental disabilities formed a grassroots movement in order to be able to support their family members with intellectual and developmental disabilities in their homes and in their communities. So just noting that prior to the creation of our home and community-based services waivers, comprehensive long-term care was only available through Medicaid funding in institutional settings. As we moved into the 70s and the 80s, what we did see in the state of Indiana was there was state funding, state line item, if you will, and social services block grants that supported individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to receive typically day services, sheltered work, and day programs. And at that same time, there began to emerge and build out of supervised group living or group homes. So that started to grow exponentially during the 70s and 80s as an alternative to larger institutional settings. And that really was the model of care through that period of time. Just really 30 some odd years ago, Indiana established Medicaid waiver programs here in the state. And with the availability of those services, it began to be possible for Hoosiers with disabilities, particularly those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, to have access to more individualized, community-based or community-supported living and working situations. During that time frame, and as we lead into the next slide, Indiana launched an effort as the 90s were closing out and we moved into the 2000s to shut down those large institutions, the developmental disability units, the Muscatatucks of our past. And that deinstitutionalization was completed in 2007. Jessica, next slide. So as we rolled out home and community-based services, wanted to note and wanted to talk today about what are home and community-based services. By their very design, those services are intended to be a complement to or a supplement rather than a replacement of services and supports that would be available through traditional Medicaid state plan, other federal and state and local public programs, as well as the typical support that we as families and neighbors and communities would provide to individuals, regardless of disability. So it's not a replacement of those things. It's not meant to supplant. It is meant to augment. The expectation for home and community-based services is that someone's experience through those supports and their life within the structure of those supports would mirror, to the largest extent possible, what life for someone without Medicaid waiver services looks like. So in other words, the support is meant to allow people to participate, not recreate an institution within the community, not recreate or create a world or a life that would not typically exist. Jessica, next slide, please. I also think it's relevant for us as we think about the federal framework and our state framework. What are the goals and objectives of home and community-based services as provided through Medicaid waiver? Obviously, one of our goals is that the services that we're providing access to, though, they are meaningful and necessary. So both meaningful and necessary. And they are indeed provided within home and community rather than in an institution. They obviously should be respectful of the individual's preferences and their life and their aspirations and also their health and safety needs. We are charged that the services that we provide through those home and community-based waivers must be cost effective. They must facilitate the individual's involvement in the community within which that individual lives and works. They are also meant to facilitate the participants' development of social relationships, not be the relationship, but to facilitate the development of social relationships within the individual's community, within their network, and to facilitate the participants' independent living. And that is one of the pieces that we look at as an individual. What are the needs and how do they meaningfully lead to supporting that individual to live as independently as possible? Next slide, please. So now is a kind of a level set as to, all right, we got waivers launched in the 90s and all of this happens and here's the purpose of waiver. Let's talk about a time frame when we kind of reached a wall, if you will, or we reached some critical mass after those waivers were launched in the state of Indiana. Currently, our division manages through our Bureau of Disability Services the home and community-based service waivers under a philosophy that was honestly developed in partnership with multiple stakeholders in response to a direction from the House Enrolled Act back in 2012. So this was related to the budget that year. And the division or the agency was charged at that time to examine and balance the overall spend on the home and community-based services waiver program, as well as the annual cost per individual. At that time, and you see this up at the top of the slide, there were approximately 9,500 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities that were supported through what was then referred to as the Developmental Disabilities
Hey,
Waiver.
Kelly, hold on a second. It's 1 second. I don't know why these aren't. Let me mess with this for a second.
Oh, is it highlighting?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's like not. Yeah, it's highlighting them. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I
click
wasn't
one more time.
realizing. Yep,
Yeah.
so I'm in the wrong. Okay, sorry about that.
You're
Is that
all
the right
right.
slide? It was I
You're-
didn't realize it was.
yeah.
I'm like, why is that not moving? Okay, I
So
apologize.
this is the slide that I was referencing. I'm
Yep,
not going
I'm
to
sorry.
revisit it, but at the top.
I didn't know that was highlighting that and it got messed up. Okay.
So back in 2012, we had really reached this kind of critical mass, if you will. There were approximately 9,500, a little more, a little less. You know, Karen Brummett, you and I were talking about this because you well remember that day and that time frame. And as you see noted lower in the slide, we had reached a point where there were well over 13,000 Hoosiers with intellectual and developmental disabilities that were on a waiting list for that home and community-based waiver. And they were experiencing extremely long waiting periods. It was actually approximate 10 to 12 year wait to be able to access that waiver. So that was what, about 12 years ago. So this group of stakeholders came together that included state officials, obviously providers and advocates. And what sprang forth from that was the creation of our current home and community-based waivers for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we created the capitated family support waiver, or the FSW, and that priority needs-based community integration and habilitation waiver, or the CIH, to address the matter. I would also note at the top, because I do want to highlight that oftentimes we forget the progress that we have made. Approximately 12 years ago, under 10,000 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities were supported through that DD waiver, or that home and community-based waiver option. Today, we have, and these are approximations, it's not an exact count, but it's pretty close, 33,000 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are supported either through the family support waiver or the community integration waiver. In addition to that, we have another, again, approximation, 13,600 individuals that are under the age of 60, so 59 and under, who are supported through the health and wellness waiver. And many of those individuals, as you might expect on that waiver, do indeed have an intellectual and developmental disability. So there has been a significant amount of growth in access to waiver services through that. Next slide, please. Just wanted to highlight again, talking about, that was the budget bill. And I referenced the CIH waiver, but through the creation of that waiver, that is when those priority categories for the CIH were also created. So the loss of primary caregiver, the caregiver over the age of 80, abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and then that other health and safety needs. So as I just stated, combined, what this allowed us to do was support a larger number of Hoosiers with intellectual and developmental disabilities with timely access, more timely access to DDRS and BEAD services through that capitated family support waiver, or the FSW, and that needs-based budget through the community integration, or CIH waiver. I would also just note that through this time frame, we've also adjusted that capitated budget for the family support waiver a couple of times. So there have been increases over time to generally maintain services and the service level to the largest extent possible. All right, Jess, we can move to the next slide. Okay, this is a really busy slide. And not going to read everything to you, but I am going to hit a great deal of the highlights because this is reflective of 2016 and forward. So this kind of leads us up to where are we at today, thinking about waiver redesign. And the reason I gave you that very brief history lesson, if you will, is to just kind of provide the context. And if you think about it, in 2012, we formed the current waiver structure for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the FSW and the CIH, 2012. And we expanded access by a great number. And that was some of the feedback that we heard from particular advocates and individuals with lived experience in 2012 was, if everyone can get access to at least a little something to be able to support us in our homes and in our communities, that is so much better than having to wait 10 to 12 years and for only those folks that could receive these high need budgets. So understand that that was the framework. Just a few short years later, you see on this slide, 2016, the division, the Bureau began to re-engage strongly with individuals across the state of Indiana to talk about what next. Now that this is in place and we are working under this philosophy, we're beginning to hear and we're beginning to witness needs are changing. The individuals that we are supporting are changing. And as I reflected, we are serving a rapidly growing number of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So how also do we ensure sustainability? Because yes, we want quality services. Yes, obviously we want to meet needs and be reflective of the individual and meet those specifically. When we also want to create a system that is sustainable so that we can support people, forward into a future and a quality life. So in 2016, once again, began really over a 2-year period between 2016, 2018, traveling around the state, virtual sessions, in-person sessions, holding individual and family town halls to listen, to gather feedback. What do you want? What are your needs? And at that same time, we started to look at implementing Life Course, which really is just that person-centered philosophy, placing the individual at the center of all that we do, not just from a service perspective, but from a system perspective. We also had, at that time, the formation of the 1102 Task Force, which again went out across the state of Indiana, listening to individuals and advocates and family members and providers and community members as to what was working, what was not working, what was needed in the future. From that, there was an 1102 report to the General Assembly, and that task force began focusing on the recommendations put forth to improve services and supports for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And at the same time, the division and the Bureau took that feedback and started to put forth and summarize what were we hearing. And a lot of you may have seen the thought bubbles at the time, right? The word bubbles as to people wanted jobs, people wanted, home support, that they wanted a holistic array. They wanted to be able to easily navigate the system. So all of those things we began to use to inform the redesign, what would be the future state of home and community-based waivers. We also launched Building Bridges events that continue yet today. So those aren't a one and done. That is a system of regular engagement with our stakeholders throughout the state. Those are now being held in person again and virtually. We made some changes in 2018 around person-centered planning within our waivers. And we also had some rate increases for direct support professional wages and a cap increase. Then in 2019, we really just kicked off full-fledged waiver redesign activities. And so we were beginning to address those very matters that I was discussing, that we gathered from the feedback, that we gathered from the 1102 as to what should waivers look like. And there was an initial concept paper published, that's still out there. And then during that time, may not be on there, but a little thing called COVID knocked on the door in 2020 and significantly changed, I think, all of our trajectories for a couple of years. But we began and continued to move forward as much as we possibly could in light of COVID. There was a case management innovation and transition that occurred in 2021. And that is the model that we currently work under. So that is a special waiver. It's called a B4 waiver, where we contract with a identified group of case management entities with very clear expectations. And it also more formalizes the partnership with the state, because what did we hear and what do we know? Navigating the system, good systems navigation is foundational to all that we do in supporting people in home and community. At that same time, state funding, I want to be clear, I'm talking about state line items, state funding, strictly state funds for sheltered work. And that would be folks that were measured to be at a productivity level of 50% or higher. Funding through the state for that service was eliminated at that point. It continued as a pre-vocational service for those who had performance metrics under 50% as funded through the waiver, but it was eliminated as a state-funded service. In 2022, as we were beginning to come out of COVID, we released what we refer to as the Path Forward document. It is still out there and available. It really kind of laid out the framework as to where we were going in waiver redesign. We released our transition plans around the waivers, and I'll talk a little bit about that here at the end. We also launched, I think most of you are very familiar with our rate methodology work that resulted in some historic rate increases to improve the quality and availability of services through our home and community-based waivers. And we launched a multitude of projects through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, or COVID-funded COVID funding to really help inform our waiver redesign efforts. I think most of you know in 2024, we were planning for the implementation and the integration of the waiver structure in the Bureau of Disability Services that we currently work under. But I want to take a pause here to highlight, you see the ARPA funding, and you see a little outshoot from that says Employment Transformation Plan. And yesterday we had one of our Employment Transformation Grant partners share with us just some outstanding news. And I wanted to turn it over to Kyle Ingram to share that with us. So Kyle, if you would, please.
Yes, thanks, Kelly. So Pam Verberg from the ARC of Greater Boone County reached out to us yesterday. I think almost immediately as they were submitting their letter to the Department of Labor to request their withdrawal of their 14C certificate for subminimum wage. So we got an email from Pam celebrating that. And she also shared a little bit of information about some of the work that they're doing in alignment with that move away from sheltered work that I wanted to just quickly flag, because I think it's a neat little story about some of their work. So in response to their move away from subminimum wage, Pam says, our social enterprise team is currently working through wage reviews. We based our starting wage on a $7.25 on a 50% productivity rate so that we could hire as many people as possible. We've been doing some work. We now have people who are fully meeting the 100% productivity level, which will result in a wage of $14.50 per hour starting in December. They've done some leadership changes to the program, but they also have two full-time production coaches who are employed by the enterprise and not billing services to state funds. So they have two of those folks who are helping to break down barriers to the individuals that are working in the enterprise setting. Two creative solutions that they have done. First one, someone with pretty severe ADD has a history of wandering. He is now listening to his own personalized playlist of techno music, and productivity has soared. Another person who has been known to be very slow and steady and methodical in their work, but doesn't have a good sense of time, is using a countdown clock to help them get the rhythm of their goal and their work. And those two accommodations for those folks have made a big difference. So we just wanted to, I thought it was a neat little email. Wanted to just kind of spotlight the work that the ARC of Greater Boone County is doing to move away from some minimum wage and some of the successes that they've shared with us. So yeah, thanks,
Thank
Kelly.
you, Kyle. Hats off to ARC of Greater Boone County. I was so excited when I saw that, individuals making $14.50 an hour, coming out of that sub minimum wage, and really doing this through creative supports. And, I referenced early in home and community-based services, now doing this through typical workplace support, right? Not looking at it as a special state-funded approach to support. So just really exciting. And I know Pam Verbarg and the team are likely going to share more. We're going to have some other success stories from our partners that, we're going to continue to share. But I just wanted to highlight that. It popped in my inbox yesterday. I think I responded immediately. And those are beginning to be highlighted to us. So thank you, Kyle. So let me finish out this slide because I know I want to leave us some time to talk. But again, as you well know, we were moving through this, and part of our waiver redesign really was moving the operational authority for what was formerly known as the Asian Disabled Waiver for folks that are under the age of 60, and creating a new waiver, the Health and Wellness Waiver. So moving that newly created waiver, the Health and Wellness Waiver, from the Division of Aging to the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services, BEADS, as well as the TBI waiver. That was effective just this past July. So now we have this, the four waivers that are under the array, and really looking at that in the context of redesign and reset as we think about supporting individuals with disabilities. So we will move to the next slide, Jess. This is just a highlight to that path to reset, because someone asked the question. We really began in for all intents and purposes with the redesign in April of 2019. So the efforts formally commenced after the feedback and engagement work through the task force, through those town hall meetings, and then publishing the concept paper. So putting forth what we had learned and what we were planning to do, and what was identified as the desired outcome for waivers. And then, as I referenced, we really had to pause that work. I'll never forget the day. I didn't work for the state then, March 6th, 2020, when the world kind of came to a halt. Obviously, the work of the agency and the division really turned toward just securing individuals' health and safety, ensuring that we kept the system afloat and the wheels on the bus, and we could support people where they were and keeping them safe. So as COVID obviously it didn't end, but the pandemic, the public health emergency, as it came to conclusion, we really relaunched, next slide, please, Jessica, our efforts at redesign, reset in 2022. You all have seen this slide before, but I just think it's a good reference point. I'm highlighting this because we're going to be moving into some new waiver amendments. Public comment will be opening up soon. So just giving all of you a bit of a background. Obviously, we did that early work on the age of disabled waiver, just the renewal was completed. We looked at the rates were amended, you know, completed by July 1st of 23. Then we had some operational and programmatic changes that needed to take place. So that all of that was completed. And those went into effect July 1 of 24. That's the reference that I made to those 4 waivers now exist under the umbrella of DDRS. There were some changes in services for alignment, and all of those have been shared with this council previously. But just wanted to highlight that. A big piece of that work continued to be our employment and system transformation and the implementation of our innovation pilot projects to inform our efforts at future state. Next slide, please. So now what? For 2025, what we are looking at, and I just referenced this, is that you will soon receive notice around public comment. We look for that to happen around mid-December if all goes as planned. Right now, internally, we are reviewing, and you see that at the top, mid-November, we are reviewing the drafts for the waiver amendments. And then those should be completed and approved and ready for tribal and public comment by the first part of December. You saw on that previous slide, the largest focus of this first amendment that would be effective July 1 is LCAR. So that's that level of care assessment representative. That is the transition to the vendor Maximus to be that door, that gateway for level of care assessment and access to the pathways waiver, the TBI waiver, the health and wellness waiver. They currently conduct the assessments. They're referred to as a PASSAR for nursing facilities. They have an existing contract. They are working internally on the scope of work of that contract in anticipation of the July 1 launch for the LCAR. And I will hit some of the highlights for our 2025 waiver changes on the next slide. But I do want to stress this July 1 really is a significant focus on the LCAR implementation. We then have planned a second submission, another set of waiver amendments that would then be effective November 1st in 2025. That is the desired go live for that. And you will see at the bottom some of the significant dates, if you will, as we prepare that waiver amendment. Know that we really are already in the process of drafting, and obviously we're using what we're learning from the IPPs, we're using what we hear from stakeholders, we're using previous information that was gathered through those town halls, as well as building bridges, as well as 1102, to inform our future efforts at waiver reset. So in late May, we anticipate that last set of amendments for this upcoming calendar year would be in draft form, and they would be under review and approval through the Family and Social Services Administration leadership in readiness for that tribal and public comment. And we would anticipate again about mid-June that set of amendments would be open for public comment. And then that would close out in late July with submission of the waivers to CMS. And then they have a 90-day period of review for those amendments. Again, with an anticipated effective date of November the 1st. Next slide. Holly Wemsett, our BDS director, went over this, I believe, the last DDRS advisory, but I thought I would be remiss just not to highlight this again as we talk about the 2025 waiver changes. So again, the LCAR implementation and the new nursing facility level of care tool for children. So those first two items on the left of the screen are what are critical in this first submission of waiver amendments for a July 1, 25 execution. All of the items listed on that left side are planned, but those are all dependent on budget approval. And they are scheduled for the November 2025. So while we're working on them, there's still a lot of tasks and stages and processes that need to be completed. So some of the other things that we are looking at in waiver amendments is revising how we track the slots, the waiver slots, and update enrollee counts on the waiver. Obviously, I think many of you are aware about the legislatively required implementation of a direct support professional statewide training curriculum and registry. We are looking to align eligibility assessment across waivers. We are looking to expand self-direction again. That would be in November. That's in November. We are also looking at technology or infrastructure updates. As it relates to services and service definitions, we are looking to further align service definitions across all the waivers. One in particular is structured family caregiving. But you'll see that fourth bullet. We also need to look at structured family caregiving as a whole and how it might look in the future and how we support people in those familial settings, if you will. We have a few innovation pilot projects or IPPs that are focused on this very matter, and we are using those as demonstration and to inform any redesign or reset, if you will, of that particular service. We're also focused on services for individuals with dual diagnosis. Again, we have multiple innovation pilot projects or IPPs that are focused on that. We've also, as I mentioned last month, been supported through some national collaborative to learn how to better support individuals with dual diagnosis through home and community-based services. And we will continue to look at the expansion of services that support competitive integrated employment. So next slide, Jess. So the future for waiver reset, we're going to continue to build on and expand those original goals of waiver redesign post-COVID, reflecting on where we're at and our current environment, and reflective of the fact that we have new populations that are being supported through the Bureau of Disability Services. Our goal remains, as recommended by the 1102 Task Force, as well as strongly supported through engagement with stakeholders, is to create a set of new and sustainable cross-disability waivers. So a new set, a new array of waivers that would better meet the needs of those we support and provide greater flexibility in a sustainable fashion. We'll continue to incorporate the feedback that we have received and will receive. Obviously continue to reflect upon the waiver enhancements that have been completed to date through 2025. We just continue to state we're going to share and be transparent, but the changes are still very early, and we're early in planning stages, and we continue to need extensive input from our community, individuals, families, providers, advocacy organizations, and others. So I close with, this is what we think the future will look like, what you see at the bottom of this slide. Currently, we have a family support waiver that's a capitated waiver. We have a community integration and HAB waiver that is a needs-based emergency placement waiver for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities with the greatest of needs, and there are priority criteria and categories for that. There is a health and wellness waiver that supports individuals who meet nursing facility level of care. And we have the traumatic brain injury waiver. And we support, I don't know, a little under 200 folks on that traumatic brain injury waiver. And obviously that supports individuals that have a TBI or traumatic brain injury. In the future, we envision 3 waivers. We don't know what they're going to be called, but reflective of that array and reflective that there are individuals that may have minimal support needs. We have likely the majority that would fall somewhere in the, the middle where waiver 2 is. And then we have, again, some outliers who would have a greater level of need. So really looking at that holistic array of services. We've got 3 blocks. That's the goal. May it look different? Possibly. So I thank you for your patience and giving me a time to give a little bit of a history level and some insight into our future. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Kelly. Does anyone have any questions or anything or thoughts, or is this helpful as we're moving forward and looking at some planning in January and hopefully facilitation of just next steps with this group and how we want to move forward to support all this work?
Kelly, can I ask this? So I know we have had groups and we've started them and pulled them back. So children, we've talked about having a children's waiver and kind of running that separately from adults in the past and kind of went down that path probably pretty deep and then kind of pulled back out. So when you think about 3 waivers, are you really just thinking children will kind of fall in this 3 buckets at this point?
I will be honest, Karen. I don't think any of us are saying there will or there won't be a children's waiver. There's and there are views on both sides of the camp. I've heard, I've heard, yes, it's a good thing. And I've heard, yes, it's a bad thing, to have a children's waiver. So it's not off the table. Obviously in this concept, it would be inclusive across the lifespan.
So can I ask a question? Is this the goal to have these waivers? I think, is it 5 years when they need to be submitted? Would that be the goal, to have the work done by then?
I think I've shared previously, we remain, and again, and I'm, I'm cautious because it requires obviously review and approval beyond my pay grade, if you will. It's also dependent upon a lot of factors as far as budget, and CMS review and approval, but we continue to target mid to late calendar year 2027 to have this in place, or at least have the concept ready to launch. So that's what's guiding our internal work.
Awesome.
Anything else? Carrie's asked, Kelly, do you anticipate new administration significantly affecting budget allotment to do the things you're looking to do in terms of waiver changes?
Yeah, where we're at right now is where we're at anytime there's a transition in administration. We are in a kind of a wait and see and hold pattern. We have to allow that new administration to get seated. They have their transition plan or team in place. I think they're just gathering information now and assessing. Obviously, anything that we do, regardless of any administrative change, is dependent on budget. And we're cognizant of the fact that we have a legislative session, coming up, and it is a budget year. So we always work within that time frame. I have not been given any indication of any halt in what we're doing. I just am working under the mode that we're in transition, and so kind of just pausing, allowing that new administration to level set, and then receiving guidance from them.
I have one more question if nobody else does. So how about this advisory board? What is its role? I didn't see it listed out in the stakeholders or, listed in any way. Is there any, besides coming to the meetings once a month, is there anything in all of this that you're going to ask of us?
Well, and Jessica, this may be helpful where we could share kind of the legislation, the bylaws, but one of the pieces is obviously we're required, this body is advisory, but we're required to report updates, performance metrics. That's why you receive the data. That's why Teresa presented today, just so that there's some accountability there and it's public. In addition, when we are planning for waiver amendments, they are brought to this advisory body. This is one of the first, places that is shared.
And I think to jump in on that, Kim, I think that's what and we'll have a little bit more information before the January meeting.
Yes.
That we'll send you all, but I think that's what we want to really take time in January to do kind of it's not kind of, but a
broad overview,
a broad like discussion about this group, how you, because the legislation is somewhat broad in terms of, you guys are advisory, right? So there's not voting and things like that, but it's broad in the sense of how we want to make the best use of our time, your time, the information you give us. And so that's why we didn't want to do, we were going to do it this meeting, but then we realized we have some new folks coming in. So we thought, let's wait until those folks, join us in January, just because there's some, new folks, and it would just make more sense. So more to come in December where we'll email you, but I think it's in a sense almost I don't know what we're going to call it, but just really where we're just discussing what folks, how they think they can best inform us, advise us, how often, what people's thoughts are on the structure of these meetings, it moving forward, because it is somewhat broad in that sense of we can make this what we want it and what's most beneficial for individuals as well as the folks that are advising us. So good question, and kind of helps lead us into January for sure.
Yeah, because just listening to what you report out probably isn't advising.
Yeah. Yes. And we want you guys to have the information, but we also want you, we have folks on here on purpose, right, who can give us their perspective and their insight in how we can continue to improve services. So, yeah. And Kathy
has it.
And we have, Kim, in the past, and we've used the advisory council. We've had work groups. It informed the development of our system transformation plan and some of our other waivers. So this group is used in that vein.
Right.
It's just not
like a room full of smart people.
It's not legislated that way.
Yeah.
Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, I think in one of the slides, I know there were a lot of preliminary engagement strategies that we employed when we kicked off waiver redesign, a lot of town hall type meetings, a lot of sort of public comment session type opportunities, and we will continue to engage in a number of those activities outside of this council as well to really try to hit a broader swath, I guess, of voices across the state. And so that will continue. I think we would be, obviously looking to you all for advisement and how best to do that. And in light of kind of what Kelly shared about the waiver reset and the populations we're looking to support and how we might be able to best engage people across the state in some of those conversations. But obviously our team is interested in hearing kind of current needs and wants of the system and how we might best be able to strike that balance between what Kelly shared as far as the fiscal considerations, what the waivers are intended to do, but also meet the critical needs of the folks that we're trying to support across the state. So, you're welcome to either in this meeting or outside of this meeting, send us some feedback on like, hey, these are areas where, we always try to hit pockets of the state that are maybe not as frequently visited or not as populous because those people are sometimes missed in the overarching kind of big picture. So if there are places and spaces that we can be to try to help with some of these conversations, please let us know.
And Noah, I think you were going to speak. I think you went off mute. Did you want to share something?
I was just sharing that Kathy had her hand raised.
Oh, okay, thanks. Thank you. Does anyone else have any quick thoughts? Or we're not going to have time for a video, but that's okay. I'm going to send a video to everyone when I have found a good video. So, Kelly, any closing items or anything? I do really quick, Kelly, before you do that, I want to just make sure I did put in the chat the link. We have still open the advisory position for an individual. I'm really excited. We've had like 27 responses so far, which is amazing. And so that is open until the 4th, December 4th. I'll send out another announcement as a reminder, but please continue to share that. It's within a couple hours that we had some people responding. And just no meeting in December. We will meet virtually in January. So just FYI on that. Yep. Okay. Thanks, Kelly. Go ahead.
Just quickly, I know we shared last month, but I want to once again thank Kelly Hartman and Karen Brummett for their service. This is their last official DDRS advisory council meeting as we're dark. Next month we don't meet, and we will send out an email notice and announcement. But I do want to recognize that in January, Jim Wiltz will be joining us as the appointee by Indiana ABC, and Laura Fife will be joining us as our case management appointee. And hopefully we will also have some information around individual with lived experience after we process the application. So as we close, I just want to thank you. This will be our last meeting of the year. I want to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving and a very blessed holiday season. Appreciate so very much all that you do.
Thank you all, and stay tuned for more information as I get the notes out and calendars and everything like that. But always open, and you can email, call if you have any questions or anything like that. Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Take care.